2021 was slated to be an amazing year for Warhammer games, with Darktide planned for around April and Total War Warhammer 3 later on in the year. There was a lot to look forward to. Well, after one of the first delays we were given on Darktide, followed by general radio silence, we were given a trailer for a brand new game, Chaos Gate Demon Hunters. Along with continuing the trend of visually impressive game trailers, it boasted a main plot about the somehow most secretive faction in the Imperium, the 7-foot-tall, silver-clad anti-demon Grey Knights. Sadly, another strategy game in the already towering pile of them, but after the release of Mechanicus back in 2018, I'm more than willing to give these kinds of games a shot. Was Chaos Gate able to exceed the expectation for another run-of-the-mill 40k strategy game, or would it be cast aside, lost in the pile of cookie-cutter skirmish games? I guess there's only one way to find out. Chaos Gate was released in early May of 2022, amidst the delays and pushbacks of the highly anticipated Total War Warhammer 3 and Darktide, being an incredibly enjoyable skirmish game that could equally be summed up as XCOM but Warhammer. As someone who's yet to play XCOM, I can't really confirm this, but being reminiscent of a titan of the genre is definitely a step in the right direction. The game begins incredibly strong with a beautiful yet oddly smooth textured intro cutscene, a visual style that continues throughout the entire game. While it's definitely a different stylistic choice than most other Warhammer games follow, I'm a massive fan, as it makes the silhouettes and character models stand out from the run-of-the-mill Grimdark. You play as a brother captain of the Grey Knights, psychic powerhouses that are responsible for sending demon Primarchs back to the warp. These 7-foot-tall shining super soldiers are a secretive faction of the Imperium focused on neutralizing the demons spilling out of the Great Rift. As such, their operations take advantage of strike teams, small squads focused on precise and swift attacks meeting demons head-on in close combat. This plays incredibly well into Chaos Gate, where you control these small strike squads, setting them to do operative shit all across a galaxy invaded by the demons of Nurgle. The responsibility you're tasked with is to halt a growing pox of bubonic Nurgle disease, with every new bloom bringing you to a different planet attempting to learn from but ultimately stop this growing threat of chaos. Traveling through the system and repairing your ship are a passive game mechanic that can have you planning routes and construction projects to most improve your units with occasional interruptions involving your crew. In addition to this, every 50 days you'll receive a Grandmaster Zoom call to discuss your story progress but also increase the tier of equipment that can drop. The units you're tasked with commanding all have their specific positives and negatives, each with a reason to bring them. Your Justicar is a frontline duelist but mostly a tank class. Apothecaries offer a wide array of healing and buffing abilities just as much as they do strong psychic AoE attacks. Interceptors are quick, taking advantage of their teleporting abilities to either get past enemies or just deal damage outright. And your Purgators are ranged specialists with heavy fire support. Throughout the game, you'll have opportunities to recruit more classes like the Paladin, which is a more defense-focused Justicar, the Chaplain, a just better Apothecary, the Librarian, who specializes in psychic attacks, with the Purifier closing the distance from the Purgator and taking advantage of more Flamer-style weapons. Each of your units gain XP through completing missions. It's spent towards the skill tree, unlocking more varied subclasses. The only things halting you from steamrolling the battlefield is how punchy your enemies can end up being, as you're closer to tabletop Grey Knights than lore-accurate ones. Tactics take center stage as new tools and skills offer better ways to take on difficult fights, with the addition of constantly needing to keep the Warp Surge meter in mind. The Warp Surge meter is often increased by both the ending of a turn and most uses of willpower. Willpower is a resource each of your Grey Knights can use to bolster their attacks or as a requirement to use certain abilities. The only downside is to regain lost willpower, you'll need to kill enemies or scour the map for seeds. Warp Surges offer a myriad of sometimes devastating modifiers to a mission, like additional reinforcements, additional armor, or even a mission permanent subtraction to your health or willpower. The options in battle are relatively unchanged from most other turn-based skirmish games, the main addition being some actions tied to specific skills. In terms of what you'll be beating down, it's chaos. Nurgle aligned chaos for that matter, and they live up to their reputation. Many of their smaller swarm units, including cultists, still provide a large amount of resilience, and it's not uncommon for many of their units to have debuffing attacks, emulating the virulent plagues their weapons can hold. This is bolstered by the growing strength of opponents you'll face based off of a planet's corruption. While you may start off fighting poxwalkers and cultists, the more corrupted areas will bring more and more units from the Death Guard. Sadly, the game doesn't touch on any of the other, in my opinion, more interesting Chaos Gods, and while the enemy model design and game balance is good, the repetitive encounters can end up being a drain through extended playtimes. This is especially prevalent through longer-term holdout missions, which I never enjoyed playing. The punchy, interactive fun of skirmishes never took a penalty, but the repeated map layouts and sometimes very poorly placed objectives led to some frustration more than anything. To the game's credit, it constantly drove me to look for new, interesting combos to take full advantage of my growing strike force. The game isn't without its issues, and the main one that will crop up throughout the campaign is the lack of maps and mission types. This does improve over time with a higher corruption leading to technically more varied maps, but variation is just a problem in this game. In terms of enemies and locations, I see that being improved in the future, as almost a year post-launch, they've released some good and bad additions to the game. I won't touch on Duty Eternal on this video, but from experiencing launch and now, I can see the game has had suitable improvements, mainly to its performance. Now for a large fault of the game. While the gameplay is enjoyable, the story can be incredibly cookie cutter and safe, through no fault of the voice actors. 40K is a difficult environment to make a good, unique story out of, as there's been nearly 40 years of books, codices, and even animated shows. As such, being a Grey Knight taking on a Nurgle with the help of an Inquisitor is just a bland and safe premise, and the worst part was it wasn't even executed interestingly. It doesn't help that throughout the campaign it seems like there's a checklist for named characters to show up, and while it's cool the first time, it gets a bit ridiculous to be pulling certain characters to what should be one of many Grey Knight forces taking on one of many Nurgle. It surely doesn't detract from the story, but I can't help but compare it to Mechanicus. Mechanicus is most definitely the gold standard for 40K games. Gothic, looks great, sounds better, and plays like a beauty. It took, again, another unrepresented faction and put them into the limelight in a fun, enjoyable skirmish game. While their systems may be similar, I find Mechanicus significantly more interesting for many reasons past just the god tier OST. Mechanicus had the balls to create a story without the need to pull in very known named characters, as this expedition to steal Archaeotech should be one of thousands. As such, the choices you make, while important to this story, are indifferent to the universe. That's the main thing. The choices you can make have changes and effects in more than just single-line dialogue. Chaos Gate does deliver in many facets, with a great atmosphere, amazing voice acting, great sound effects, and the gameplay loop, while lacking variation, is at its core very enjoyable. But it doesn't give you the choices Mechanicus does. You're railroaded into one story, and while it seems like what you're doing is so important to the galaxy, it doesn't change how you're realistically doing none of it. You get no choice in the matter of how your Grey Knight's force actually affects the system. And none of the cohort above the Baleful Edict will suitably judge your actions past a singular disappointed or approving voice line. And to me, that's just really disappointing. Overall, Chaos Gate is a very enjoyable game, but it keeps reminding me of a better one. With the trend of post-launch content, I do see this game being filled with more variation in the future. I mean, hell, in the midst of writing this review, the new DLC Execution Force got announced, and that looks awesome. Sadly, no amount of post-launch content can fix the lacking story, and that takes a lot out of it. I'd still give it a recommendation, but exclusively to 40K or strategy fans. And even at that, still recommend on a sale. Well, I digress. The next review should be out soon. I'll see you then.